Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the most disturbing thing you've ever witnessed in real life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My father was dying of cancer, and the medication took his muscle mass and the calcium off his bones. He stood up from his chair, his legs gave out, and 3 vertebrae crumbled from the fall. The noise he made trying to get up was something I actually repressed. I only remember calling my sister and croaking out, "He's in a lot of pain," and that it didn't sound like it does in the movies. This isn't mine, but my aunt's. She's heavily traumatized because of this, but my 2 cousins had just left for school on the bus, freshman and sophomore in high school. My aunt was gently shaking awake by her husband after 2 hours after they had left. She looked at him and asked, "What?" He looked her in the eyes and said, "I want you to see this." He pulled a gun from behind his back and shot himself in the head and stood over her. She never once stepped foot into the home she had owned for 20 years ever again. She refused to even go back in that direction. Moved in with my grandmother for a bit and has lived in an apartment alone ever since, and has been drinking herself to near death ever since. Doesn't want the help. She just wants to smoke, drink, watch TV, and sleep. Her kids visit, but it's difficult for them to see her like that as well. It's been years now, and it's just the new normal. My 13-year-old brother is vomiting blood, like lots of it, filled the puke basin. He was recovering from a surgery to remove benign tumors in his face and throat, and the wounds weren't staying closed properly. They would open up and drip blood down to his stomach, where it would pool up until he ejected it. I held his back at the basin while my parents ran around packing for another medevac jet to the only hospital in the state that would take him. He died 3 years later. A lot more than I need to have seen, but when I was 5 or 6, I woke up to my grandma and dad panicking because someone had snuck onto the farm in the night and poisoned the drinking water and all the water troughs, even the chickens. She raised sheep, rabbits, chickens, a couple of retired trail horses, peacocks, ducks, and every stray cat in the country, and we had a pony. She kept little minnows in the barrels and some troughs, and they were all floating on the surface of the water when I went out into Timon and Pumbaa nightgown. I saw them trying to cover all the animals with whatever tarps they had, so all of the children didn't see. There were 3 of us young kids living there and 2 cousins who visited daily. My dad told me what happened and told me I could cut some of the pony's mane to keep her memory with me. We had to stay inside the whole day, and I wasn't allowed to tell anyone else what had happened. I heard them talking openly about it. It was my mom's biker boyfriend and his friends who did it. The crimes escalated even further from there, but that was the one that stayed with me because my grandma had about 40 heads of sheep. Not one survived. We ended up in a sort of outlaw witness protection about a year later. A guy who jumped off a small tower outside our local cathedral back when I worked as an EMT. He was high on something and was convinced he could fly. Instead of flying, he literally face-planted onto the concrete slab at the bottom. When we got to him, he was still alive and breathing. And as it was a cold, foggy night in the middle of winter here in Britain, the oddest thing was that you could see his breath, which isn't odd in itself, apart from the fact it was red. We couldn't even find anywhere to put in an OP airway. His face, or what was left of it, was so messed up. And the noise I won't forget until my dying day. I don't know how to describe it, but it was awful. I work in emergency veterinary medicine, so I've seen things you wouldn't believe. A happy pit bull with a hatchet in his head and his tail wagging. Dogs hit by lawnmowers, all sorts of things. But the thing that still haunts me is watching a grown man choke and punch a child that was maybe 6 in a gas station parking lot. Oh my god, it was absolutely horrible. I got out to stop him, and the man drove off, so I followed him while I called the cops. They got behind him and pulled him over and told me I could leave. I hope they took the kid away, but I'll never know. I still think about it from time to time because the kid looked so defeated and empty. It was truly haunting. He never fought back or even held up his arms, he just cried. And I know it's because that guy has done that before, who knows how many times. I was caring for my uncle. He had bowel cancer. I went and let myself in and I found him on the floor. His stomach had ripped open when they had an operation months prior. Straight up the middle, body fluids, blood spewing out. I held his stomach together for 40 minutes and put pressure on it. Waiting for an ambulance to come was a nightmare as there were severe delays and I couldn't get him into the car. He died a week later. 7 years later, I still think about it. Recently, a car came flying at us, driving erratically. We were doing about 78 miles per hour, so this was going 85 to 90. The driver loses control and hits a retaining wall. My daughter, who is an EMT, went running to the scene to help. One dead on the scene and the other near death. I could never find an update on the survivor. I used to live by a highway where the speed limit was 75, but it had one of those flashing lights to turn down my road, but people missed it and wrecked all the time. One night I heard a loud bang and ran down to help. Totally lucid and coherent man, covered in blood with his face caved in, still talking and wondering why it felt weird when he did. I don't think I even told anyone else but my grandpa about that. I guess it's one of those things you block out over time. Oh crap, there are so many. 3 standouts. I was in Vietnam on patrol boats. We had a program where we'd sometimes take a Navy corpsman, medic, place to place, small villages. A friendship program. The corpsman would dispense vaccinations, shots of penicillin, clean up injuries and wounds, maybe throw in some stitches, etc. Those people didn't have a doctor to go see. The boat crew I was with, we'd buy sweets and treats to pass out to the kids and such. It was nice. You got to feel friendly toward those people. Then this one day we stopped at one place to find smoke in the air. When we got there, the village was destroyed. The VC or NVA had decided those villages should be taught a lesson for being friendly to us. Shit, they were dead, all of them, except maybe 5. I saw who'd made it to a hiding spot. Men, women, children, babies, the chickens, and livestock. Obviously, a number of the women had been violently harmed, some of them barely old enough to be in school. The head of the village had died hard. They had castrated him, shoved his stuff in his mouth, had him tied to a post, and had cut him so many times you couldn't count. Then built a fire to burn him. I saw a little girl not more than 3 or 4 who'd been gutted. That shit haunted me for a long time. Also, Vietnam. My best friend bleeding to death in my arms and not a damn thing I could do to stop it. The injury is too massive. His last words were his worry about who'd take care of his wife now. My wife, aneurysm. The doctor came out and told me she was only still alive due to the machines. Her brain showing she was brain dead on the monitor. And she asked me what I wanted to happen. My wife of 41 years and I had discussed such things. She did not want to live as a vegetable or total invalid, and I'd promised her. So I went in, kissed her, and pulled the plugs myself. The hardest effing thing I ever had to do. Not only did she die, so did a part of me. The best part. I was sitting in my car, waiting in the middle of the road with my hazards on. A young boy was chasing his dog up a perpendicular road. As soon as the dog crossed, another car came toward me, and the tires exactly ran him over. I thought he might have made it when I saw it coming. It all happened in a flash. The dog flopped around for a few seconds with the boy sobbing over him. Then it died. And I watched the boy carry the lifeless body away. I wish I would have honked, flashed my lights, or done something, anything, but it all happened so fast. In Kunar, Afghanistan, most of the country, really, mentally disabled children were sold as slaves. As we drove or walked by, the old men would stretch the boys' mouths open to show us their value. Oh, we'd usually give them their $2 to $5, take the kid somewhere we could get him on a bird, and let people in the rear deal with it. Heading out on a mission that involved several false insertions, we came across a young boy for sale that we really couldn't take with us as we were just about to set up and catch an IED maker. The old man tried to bargain, dropped his price, etc. We had to decline and couldn't even take him to the next village as our target was closer. As we pulled away, the turret gunner started yelling to look behind us. The old man had slit the boy's throat, nearly decapitating him, then threw him under the tires of a passing A&A truck. I saw a lot of death over there. That incident showed just how little value they put on life. Working in an ER, just bedside registration as a young 20-something. I'd seen dead bodies on this job before, but that night was much worse. We had a very elderly lady come in alone with an upper GI bleed, coffee grounds, emesis. Definitely seemed out of it and wouldn't or couldn't speak. I remember halfway through my shift, she was being wheeled back out to an ambulance still vomiting. Did not look better at all. She locked eyes with me in the hall as we passed each other. I asked our charge nurse if the patient was going to a bigger hospital, since ours was smaller and had fewer resources. She said, "No, honey, she's going home to die." I'll never forget the look in that patient's eyes. She looked so defeated, it was horrible. I'm so grateful there are folks willing to work in emergency medicine, but that is not for the faint of heart. And the idea of dying alone and so sick is terrifying to me. Holding my premature firstborn while she struggled to breathe on her own and passed away in my arms. She was born at 22 weeks after the hospital sent me home the night before without checking my cervix and telling me I was just having ligament pain. My water broke less than 24 hours later, and they had to induce me the next day because her foot was already in the opening. Then they refused to help her when she was born alive because she wasn't 23 weeks. A few years later, I was holding my grandma's hand at the same hospital while she was in the ICU when she passed away. I still have issues when I need to go to that specific hospital. All of these are tragic, violent, and horrible, but it's the family things that really hit home and puts a lump in my throat, so hug somebody you love today. Not as bad as a lot of the ones on here, but my dad was picking up my grandparents to bring them over to watch American football and have a family day. Got a call that my dad would be pulling up soon with an ambulance on the way, as my grandpa had slumped over in the chair and was unresponsive. My dad was clearly distraught. He doesn't handle stressful situations well to begin with. I heard the 911 operator on my dad's Bluetooth in the car ask if anyone knew how to do chest compressions. We laid my grandpa back in his seat, and I had to straddle him and do compressions until the ambulance got there. I could tell he was already gone, but I didn't want my dad to feel I had given up. His eyes were open, and his mouth was agape. It was a little disturbing, but everyone was grateful for the effort. 1 month before her wedding about 18 years ago, my sister was ejected from a vehicle as her fiancé was driving, hit by someone running a red light. I got a phone call from Mom. She was frantic. X has been in an accident. We don't know how bad. Meet us at the hospital. I ran out of work and got there as fast as I could safely. We were asking where she was, what room, etc. We beat the ambulance there. Then we saw a gurney being rushed down the halls. I looked over and it was my sister. Her face cracked open as if you were to drop a watermelon on concrete. She had spinal fluid coming out of her ears. I told myself that can't be my sister. It was. She survived miraculously. 2 months in ICU. They put her face back together. When she was getting discharged, all the doctors and surgeons called her ICU the miracle girl. Said we should be planning a funeral, not coming home event. I'll never forget her moans and sounds as she was whisked by us on that gurney. She got married months later, as she needed lots of physical therapy. The only reason she's alive is that where the accident happened, there was an off-duty paramedic whose yard she landed in. She went a good 20 to 25 feet out the window. He grabbed his kit and began work on her immediately. He came to her party that was thrown as a fundraiser. He came to shake my hand and introduce himself. I grabbed him and sobbed while giving him a huge hug. I'll never forget him. I was in 6th or 7th grade and was walking home from school. There had been an accident at the intersection near my house, cyclist versus vehicle. I saw the cyclist lying in the middle of the road, cut up, bloodied, and either unconscious or dead. He wasn't moving, and his eyes were closed, and that I couldn't tell if he was breathing. And I'm not sure if this counts as witnessing, but sometime later I was walking to school and was at the front of the pack in a different school's crosswalk. We were in the middle of crossing when something, I'm still not sure what, made me stop. Maybe 2 seconds later, a car came through, going at least 60 miles per hour. The mirror, an inch or two from my nose. I'll admit I was shaken up the rest of the day, but at least I saved the rest of the kids and the crossing guard from seeing me get run over. I never did find out what happened to that driver. That's not even the only time I've been almost hit by a car, but at least it's the only one that counts as a near-death experience. My brother put a hatchet through my leg and beat me with a shovel when I was a kid. Saw his head cracked open when someone threw a rock at him. I got stabbed 3 times as a teenager. Also, as a teenager, my sister was in a mental institution, and one of the girls there had taken a butcher cleaver to her body. She had cut out strips of flesh with the knife sideways. I didn't see the blood, but the aftermath was insane. Her whole body covered in thick, rope-like scars all over her body. I wonder about her to this day when I talk to my sister. Living in the Middle East, I saw the war break out in Tripoli, Lebanon in 2006. Death everywhere. In Istanbul, I was living in Tarlabasi when I saw someone get shot in the head. In Israel, I saw a sniper nearly kill the person driving the car I was in. I also watched someone steal a bulldozer and try to kill people. He was shot in the head by a soldier in everyday clothing. Children huffing glue in Morocco, slowly dying on the streets, and real starvation in the Anti-Atlas. Starving children in Laos and Cambodia. In Thailand, I was in a hotel and watched a 60-year-old man throw a 13-year-old girl in a bathrobe out of an elevator. She was in tears, and the hotel refused to tell me what happened. I'll never stay at a Hilton again. Them. In Florida, I woke up to my next-door neighbor passed out naked on her front stoop with a needle in her arm and bruises everywhere. We were 15. In El Salvador, children were walking around with guns looking for people door to door. In Guayaquil, kilometers of people living on top of garbage with nothing, dying of hunger and brutal. The smell to this day haunts me. In Burkina Faso, I hooked up with a woman who had genital mutilation forced on her.